Ho Ho Oh No! Santa's Funniest Festive Fails by Elena Cosma. The Chimney Conundrum. When Santa ate one too many cookies. It's a well-known fact that Santa has a sweet tooth. In fact, his love for cookies is practically legendary. Every year, children around the world leave out plates of their finest confections, hoping to please the jolly old elf. And every year, Santa obliges. After all, it's hard to say no to a fresh-baked treat when you've been flying through the cold night sky. But there's a dark side to this sugary tradition, one that isn't often talked about. You see, there's a limit to how many cookies even Santa Claus can handle. And one fateful Christmas Eve, Santa learned that lesson the hard way. It started off like any other Christmas Eve. Santa, full of holiday cheer and a bit of extra padding, was making his rounds, delivering gifts with his usual flair. The reindeer were in fine form, the sleigh was packed to the brim, and everything was running smoothly. That is, until Santa reached the Johnson household. Now, the Johnson kids were particularly fond of baking, and they had outdone themselves that year. The plate they left out wasn't just filled with cookies, it was an entire cookie smorgasbord. Chocolate chip, gingerbread, snickerdoodles, sugar cookies shaped like reindeer, and even a few fancy ones with icing and sprinkles. It was a cookie lover's dream, and Santa, bless his heart, simply couldn't resist. Just one more, he told himself after the third cookie. Well, maybe another, he muttered after the fifth. By the time he realized what was happening, Santa had polished off the entire plate. He leaned back in the armchair by the fireplace, feeling more stuffed than his own sack of toys. That was probably too many, he admitted to himself, patting his round belly. But Santa wasn't one to let a little overindulgence slow him down. I'll just take it easy on the next few houses, he thought, getting up with a groan. But as he made his way to the chimney, he started to feel the consequences of his cookie binge. The usually easy descent down the chimney suddenly felt more like a tight squeeze. Santa tugged at his belt. Had it always been this snug? He tried to shimmy his way up, but instead, he found himself stuck. This can't be happening, Santa thought, struggling to move. But no amount of wiggling or sucking in his stomach could free him from the narrow confines of the chimney. He was wedged in, and not even the magic that powered his sleigh seemed to help. Santa hung there for a moment, suspended halfway between the living room and the rooftop, and let out a deep sigh. Well, this is just great. Stuck in a chimney because I couldn't say no to a few extra cookies. Mrs. Claus is never going to let me live this down. Meanwhile, the reindeer, waiting patiently on the roof, began to get restless. Rudolph peered down the chimney, his glowing nose casting an eerie red light down the narrow shaft. Santa? You okay down there? Santa grumbled in response. Just a minor issue. Nothing I can't handle. But it wasn't getting any better. In fact, it was starting to look like Santa might have to call for backup. He tried to imagine the headlines. Santa stuck in chimney, Christmas nearly cancelled, due to cookie overload. It wasn't exactly the kind of holiday cheer he wanted to spread. But just when things were looking their bleakest, Santa had an idea. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flask of Mrs. Claus's famous hot cocoa, a secret weapon he always kept on hand for emergencies. With great effort, he managed to take a sip, and as the warm, chocolatey goodness spread through his body, he felt a little bit of the magic return. Slowly but surely, Santa began to shrink, just enough to free himself from the chimney's grip. With one final push, he popped out of the top like a cork from a bottle of bubbly. The reindeer, who had been watching anxiously, cheered as Santa dusted himself off and climbed back into the sleigh. "All right, boys," Santa said, trying to sound casual despite the sweat on his brow. "Let's get moving. And remind me to skip the cookies at the next few houses." The rest of the night went off without a hitch. Santa delivered the rest of his gifts, avoided any more cookie-induced disasters, and made it back to the North Pole with time to spare. But from that night on, Santa decided to stick to just one cookie per house. Maybe two if they were really good. As for the Johnsons, they woke up the next morning to find their plate of cookies empty and a note from Santa himself. Delicious cookies, but maybe go easy on the portions next year. Merry Christmas! And so the legend of Santa Claus was slightly revised. Yes, he still loved his cookies, but even Santa knew that sometimes less is more, especially when chimneys are involved. Story Adventurers Club series, buckle up. This adventure is just starting, and you won't want to miss it.